In just 3 minutes and 12 seconds, one question exposed the biggest budget cover-up in modern British history. Kemi Badenoch didn't shout. She didn't need to. The numbers spoke for themselves. Cameras captured Chancellor Rachel Reeves' face draining of colour. The Commons held its breath. What did the Conservative leader reveal that made £22 billion vanish into thin air? At exactly 12:09 p.m. on Wednesday, November 20th, 2024, the House of Commons chamber buzzed with pre-PMQs energy. Labour MPs sat confidently after their October budget announcement. Rachel Reeves had presented herself as the Iron Chancellor, who would fix 14 years of Conservative economic chaos. Today, that narrative would collapse. I watched as Kemi Badenoch rose from the opposition front bench, charcoal grey suit, holding a thin red folder. Red folders at PMQs meant documented evidence that couldn't be deflected. Mr. Speaker, Badenoch began with controlled precision. 6 weeks ago, the Chancellor stood at that dispatch box and told this House she had discovered a £22 billion black hole in the public finances. The chamber quietened. Rachel Reeves sat on the Treasury bench, confidence intact. She'd defended the £22 billion figure countless times. It was Labour's central justification for every unpopular decision: tax rises, spending cuts, cancelled projects. Badenoch paused. 3 seconds of silence. Can the Chancellor explain why Treasury documents obtained through Freedom of Information requests show that only £9.4 billion of that supposed black hole actually exists? The question detonated. Not £22 billion. £9.4 billion. A discrepancy of £12.6 billion. That wasn't a rounding error. Reeves rose slowly, smile tight. The leader of the opposition is playing fast and loose with figures she doesn't understand. The £22 billion black hole is well documented and independently verified by the Office for Budget Responsibility. I noticed her left hand gripping the dispatch box harder than necessary. Her jaw clenched. Badenoch didn't sit down. She opened her red folder with theatrical precision. I'm glad the Chancellor mentions the OBR, because I have here the October 2024 OBR Economic and Fiscal Outlook Report, page 47, paragraph 3.1. She held it up for cameras. The BBC feed zoomed in on the official OBR seal. The OBR states, departmental overspends in the current fiscal year total £9.4 billion, primarily concentrated in asylum accommodation costs, NHS overtime and local government support grants. Badenoch looked up. Not £22 billion, Chancellor. £9.4 billion. The chamber fell silent. Camera shutters clicked rapidly. Mr. Speaker, Reeves replied defensively, the leader of the opposition is cherry-picking one line from a 200-page document. The £22 billion figure includes unfunded commitments. Then, where's the evidence? Badenoch's interruption was surgical. Where are the Treasury documents? Where are the ministerial memos? Where are the departmental breakdowns? Because Chancellor, Badenoch continued, accelerating, my team submitted 17 separate FOI requests to the Treasury. Do you know what we received? She pulled another document, HM Treasury letterhead, clearly visible. Blanket refusals. Every single request denied under Section 35. Disclosure would prejudice government policy formulation. Badenoch's voice dripped with contempt. The evidence doesn't exist because the commitments never happened. The Commons erupted. When it quieted, Badenoch delivered the killing blow. But there's more, Mr. Speaker. While the Chancellor claims poverty and raises taxes on working families, we've discovered where billions actually went. She opened to a new section. In September 2024, 1 month before the budget, the Treasury approved £6.2 billion in emergency funding to the Department for Energy Security. The actual recipient, GB Energy, the government's new state-owned energy company, £6.2 billion, not disclosed in the budget, sent to a newly created government entity with no parliamentary oversight. In August 2024, Badenoch continued rapid fire. The Treasury transferred £4.8 billion to the National Wealth Fund. In July, £3.1 billion to regional development banks that don't yet exist. Each figure landed like a hammer. £114 billion total in undisclosed spending to Labour pet projects while claiming fiscal catastrophe. Add those together, Chancellor, and we get £14.1 billion in secret spending. Add that to the £9.4 billion real black hole, and suddenly your £22 billion figure appears. Except you've hidden where half of it actually went. The mathematics was devastating. £9.4 billion, £14.1 billion, £23.5 billion. Reeves had bundled real overspends with massive undisclosed transfers to Labour organisations, then blamed it all on Conservative mismanagement. Rachel Reeves shot to her feet, composure shattered. This is a grotesque distortion. The leader of the opposition is deliberately misleading this House about complex fiscal instruments she clearly doesn't comprehend. Pure panic disguised as outrage. Badenoch smiled coldly. Chancellor, I spent 7 years as a Treasury Minister. I understand fiscal instruments perfectly. What I don't understand is why you're hiding 14.1 billion bowls while telling pensioners you can't afford to heat their homes this winter. The political framing was lethal. Labour had found billions for pet projects while cutting winter fuel payments. Let me be very specific, Mr. Speaker, Badenoch said, pulling out another document. Treasury Ministerial Direction MD 2024-087, dated September 12th, a formal instruction from the Chancellor ordering the transfer of £6.2 billion to GB Energy without standard parliamentary approval procedures. Ministerial directions are issued when ministers order civil servants to do something warned as improper. The existence of one meant Reeves had been explicitly warned her actions were irregular, and ordered them anyway. The Permanent Secretary advised the Chancellor that this transfer may not represent value for money and lack sufficient parliamentary oversight. The Chancellor overruled him and ordered it anyway. I watched Reeves' face drain of colour. Her hands trembled as she reached for water. Every camera captured it. Where's the money, Chancellor? 3 words. Devastating simplicity. The chamber fell absolutely silent. Where's the money? £14.1 billion in secret transfers. £12.6 billion in fabricated black hole. Reeves stood silent for 8 seconds. The C-SPAN feed showed sweat beading on her upper lip. The government's fiscal strategy ensures long-term economic stability, she said hollow. All spending decisions follow Treasury guidelines. The non-answer confirmed everything. Badenoch had one final document. Mr. Speaker, I have internal Treasury emails obtained through parliamentary privilege. Email dated October 8th from the Chancellor's Principal Private Secretary to the Treasury's Chief Economic Advisor. She read, voice clear and damning. The Chancellor is concerned that the actual departmental overspend figure of 9.4 billion will not provide sufficient political justification for proposed tax rises. She has requested we identify additional unfunded commitments to reach a more substantial figure. Target 25 billion. Smoking gun. The £22 billion hadn't been discovered. It had been manufactured. Treasury officials had been ordered to inflate the black hole to justify Labour's tax agenda. The Commons exploded in chaos. Conservative MPs on their feet demanding resignation. Labour backbenchers shell-shocked. The Speaker's gavel drowned out. At 12:22 p.m., 13 minutes after Badenoch began, PMQs descended into disorder. Rachel Reeves fled the chamber without responding, surrounded by advisers. Her departure captured in perfect detail by BBC Parliament. Within minutes, Where's the Money trended #1 on X, over 500,000 mentions in the first hour. BBC interrupted programming. Chancellor faces questions over 22 Bickneen claims. Sky News ran split screen comparing Reeves' budget speech to Badenoch's evidence. By 2 p.m., the Institute for Fiscal Studies demanded full transparency on Treasury calculations. By 3:30 p.m., 3 Labour backbenchers publicly demanded Reeves release documentation. The Treasury Select Committee announced immediate hearings. On November 22nd, the Treasury released a 47-page document attempting to justify the figure. Economists immediately tore it apart. Of £22 billion claimed, only 9.4 billion represented genuine overspends. The remaining 12.6 billion consisted of policy decisions by the incoming government, Labour's own spending repackaged as Conservative failures. Labour's poll lead collapsed from 15 points in October to 3 points by December. Rachel Reeves' approval ratings cratered. The foundation of Labour's economic credibility was rubble. On December 5th, Reeves appeared before the Treasury Select Committee for a 6-hour interrogation. Under oath, she admitted the £22 billion figure may have been communicated with insufficient granularity. In plain English, she'd lied. For Kemi Badenoch, the confrontation became career-defining. Political analysts called it a masterclass. Meticulous preparation, devastating evidence, perfect timing, ruthless execution. She had exposed fundamental dishonesty at Labour's economic agenda core. Conservative polling showed a remarkable shift. Before November 20th, voters saw Badenoch as too aggressive. After her budget demolition, those same voters described her as strong, competent, and ready to govern. She had transformed from opposition leader to Prime Minister-in-waiting in 19.1 seconds. Sometimes the most powerful question isn't complicated. Sometimes it's 3 words. Where's the money? On November 20th, 2024, Kemi Badenoch proved that in British democracy, no chancellor is above accountability. Not even one who tries to hide billions while blaming predecessors. The strongest weapon in politics isn't a slogan. It's documentation, presented when denial becomes impossible.